For the first time since the Cold War, two truths are fighting on the same battlefield, one made of steel and the other made of stories. While the world watches rockets and ruins, another front is quietly unfolding. A war for the mind, the perception, the belief of who is right and who is wrong. On one side stands Moscow, declaring that encirclement is inevitable, that cities will fall and enemies will surrender. On the other, the defenders of Ukraine, wounded, weary, yet still holding, still breathing, prove that the front line is not drawn in trenches, but in the soul of those who refuse to believe defeat. This is not just about weapons, maps, or captured ground. It is about narrative warfare, a struggle to shape how history itself will be remembered. The Kremlin calls it destiny. The West calls it deception. But in the fog between, truth becomes the first casualty. Stay with us, because this is not just a story, but a strategic perspective that impacts global politics. Join us and accompany us so that hot issues and historic decisions can be spread. It begins not with tanks, but with a sentence. It's only a matter of time. That single line, repeated across Russian state media, is more than a statement. It is a performance, a theater of inevitability. Moscow presents the fall of Pokrovsk as destiny, not possibility. And in this stage play of war, the script is written not for soldiers, but for spectators. In this information age, truth is not destroyed, it is directed. The Kremlin's cameras turn battlefields into narratives, defeats into pauses, and encirclements into moral victories. The purpose is not to deceive the enemy alone, but to convince the world that resistance is meaningless. That what we see unfolding is fated, preordained by strength, justified by history. But what if inevitability itself is the illusion? While Russia's headlines speak of progress, independent observers, satellite maps, and Ukrainian field reports reveal another story, one of fierce defense of a city still alive. The so-called gray zones of combat, shown as conquered land, are nothing more than shifting sands between two exhausted armies. And yet, the psychology works. For decades, Moscow's greatest export has not been oil or gas, but certainty, the promise that its version of events is always complete. From Chechnya to Georgia, from Crimea to Donbass, the same message is repeated. Russia does not advance, it restores order. It is a message that appeals deeply to the nostalgic soul, to those who remember a world where power seemed clear and purpose unquestioned. For them, the flag planted on the ruins is not a symbol of conquest, but of return. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin has mastered this art of persuasion, transforming national trauma into national mission, ensuring that every front line feels like a page from destiny's book. But there is another truth, the truth of fatigue. Behind the rhetoric, the battlefield tells of attrition, hesitation, and human cost. Soldiers fight not for empire, but for endurance. Propaganda may declare a circle, yet the reality is a line that bends, breaks, and reforms with every passing dawn. Even among Russia's allies, doubts whisper, if this encirclement is real, why does it never close? The answer lies in what Moscow truly seeks, control not just of territory, but of tempo. To slow the narrative, to exhaust the audience, to let repetition replace revelation. It is a psychological war meant to make the world stop asking questions. And still, the questions remain. If Pokrovsk has fallen, where are the parades? If Ukraine is crushed, why does its flag still fly over the city hall? Each photograph, each report, each drone feed becomes an act of defiance, a spark of clarity in the fog of orchestrated belief. As history turns, the pattern repeats. Every empire learns that the hardest thing to occupy is not land, but truth itself. Once people see manipulation, the spell is broken. Once a single soldier says, "We still hold," 1,000 rumors collapse. This, then, is the first battlefield of our century, the theater of truth where cameras are weapons and words draw blood. The latest news from Russia reminds us that narratives can conquer before armies ever do. And as the world watches this stage, one question echoes louder than artillery. Who will write the final act? The storytellers or the soldiers? Beyond the maps, beyond the politics, there are faces, tired, dirt-streaked, human. In Pokrovsk, the line between victory and survival is drawn by those who refuse to vanish. Among them stands Sergeant Liana Konchuk, a name now whispered in every trench. "The situation is difficult," she said. "We are trying to control it, but it has only been getting worse." Her honesty breaks through the noise like a cracked bell. For in war, sincerity is a rarer weapon than guns. Konchuk's words reveal a truth that no broadcast can hide. The fight is no longer about territory, but about endurance. She describes the enemy not as a tide, but as a seep, small units moving silently, searching for gaps. 1, 2, 3 men at a time, she said. They come, they test, they fade. It is war at breathing distance, room by room, heartbeat by heartbeat. A drone operator known as Sonic, guiding his craft through the ruins, adds another fragment of truth. There's no encirclement. Fighting goes on everywhere. Through his lens, the city looks less like a fortress and more like a scar that refuses to close. And yet, that scar is alive. Every ruined house becomes a post, every corridor a frontier. War, stripped of its banners, is a very private thing. It lives inside the mind of each soldier who chooses to stay when leaving would be easier. It lives in the trembling hands that reload a rifle while remembering a child's laughter. It lives in the quiet moments when courage feels like resignation. Moscow may speak of liberation, Kiev may speak of resistance, but on this human front line there are no slogans, only choices made in dust and fear. Here, truth bleeds before bodies do. Because information moves faster than bullets, every whisper of hope, every grainy video of a flag raised again becomes ammunition in another invisible war. When a single wounded man refuses evacuation and climbs to lift his flag, the act is not political. It is sacramental. It reminds both sides that conviction, not command, defines a nation's heart. To the older generations watching from afar, this echoes an older memory: Normandy, Saigon, Fallujah, where the front line was not a place on a map but a moral test. It forces the question, how much of what we see is genuine and how much is simply arranged for us to believe? For Ukraine's soldiers, the answer is written in exhaustion. For Russia's young conscripts, it is written in fear. Each side believes the other is blinded by propaganda, yet both suffer the same blindness, the inability to see the human beneath the uniform. And there, between two armies, lies the last unoccupied territory: empathy. Vladimir Putin once declared that Russia's operation was an act of self-defense, a duty to protect its people in Donbass. But what then protects the people who stand in between, those caught not in ideology but in geography? When the dust settles, no map will show the courage of Konchuk or the patience of Sonic. No document will record how many nights they stared into darkness, wondering whether the world still cared. Because on this human frontline, wars are not won. They are endured. And as long as one heartbeat remains within the rubble, Pokrovsk still stands, if not in geography, then in memory. House to house, truth to truth. That is where this battle is truly fought. And so on this invisible front line, truth bleeds first. Every modern war begins with a story, a claim, a justification, a headline repeated until it becomes habit. In Pokrovsk, Moscow calls it an encirclement. In Kiev, they call it infiltration without dominance. But between these two definitions lies the real battlefield: perception. For centuries, empires have fought for territory. Now they fight for interpretation. The West says that Russia manipulates the truth. Russia answers that the West monopolizes it. Each accuses the other of propaganda, while both compete for a prize far more valuable than land: belief. This is not new. In February 2007, at the Munich Security Conference, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin warned that a unipolar world, a world ruled by one center of power, one narrative, one moral code, would fail. He said unipolarity is unacceptable. It leads to disregard for the basic principles of international law. Back then, few listened. Today, as the West and Russia wage parallel versions of reality, his words echo like prophecy. In the digital age, control of the narrative means control of morale. A single image, a flag raised, a column destroyed, travels faster than any bullet. It decides not just who fights harder, but who believes longer. This is why Russia invests so heavily in media. This is why Ukraine live streams the war. Both sides know that the mind of the viewer is the true high ground. To older generations who remember radio broadcasts from World War II, this feels both familiar and strange. Back then, you waited for truth to arrive on paper. Today, you must decide whether what you see is truth at all. The line between information and illusion has become invisible, like the front line itself. Ukraine's commander, General Syrskyi, says that Russian units hide among civilians, changing positions constantly. To him, the war is a house-to-house struggle, not a sustained occupation. That single statement reveals the heart of modern conflict. Nothing is static, not even reality. For Moscow, the tactic known as the slow seep is more than military. It is psychological. A creeping pressure meant to make the world accept stagnation as progress. If every day brings another rumor of a captured district, then eventually the world stops asking if any district was captured at all. But this strategy of perception has a flaw. It underestimates fatigue. When every headline shouts victory, the word itself loses weight. When every broadcast promises triumph, silence becomes suspicious. In this silence, truth whispers back. At the Valdai Forum in 2023, Putin described this shift as a global and irreversible transformation. He said that the era of domination, not only of armies but of ideas, was ending. The future is not unipolar, he declared. The future is multipolar, and Russia will be one of its architects. These words reveal how Moscow sees itself, not as an aggressor, but as a reformer of world order. To Western ears, it sounds defiant. To many in the global South, it sounds liberating. That is the brilliance and the danger of perception. The same sentence can be both threat and promise depending on who listens. This is why information wars are so seductive. They offer victory without accountability, glory without graves. But behind the screens, the soldiers still bleed. Behind the speeches, families still wait. And so we return to Pokrovsk, the city that exists not just in rubble but in rhetoric. Each side claims to own it. Perhaps neither does. Perhaps the only thing truly conquered here is clarity itself. If you care about this issue, which affects politics, please say amen in the comments below. Because this, dear listener, is not only about Russia or Ukraine. It is about us, about how easily we believe, how quickly we forget, and how desperately we want one side to be right, so that our world still makes sense. Every empire pays for control, first in money, then in men, and finally in meaning. In Pokrovsk, each street is a receipt written in blood. Moscow calls it liberation. Kiev calls it defense. But the real cost is not in which side wins. It is in how many truths must die for victory to live. Numbers tell one story. 249 Russian casualties in 3 days. Dozens of shelters destroyed, a handful of streets gained. But numbers are merciless things. They record the dead without remembering their faces. They measure loss, not grief. For Russia, the campaign was meant to demonstrate precision and resolve. Instead, it has revealed exhaustion and doubt. Each soldier lost in Pokrovsk is another fracture in the illusion of inevitability. Each mother who buries a son erodes the certainty of triumph. The government's television screens show arrows advancing. The villages show empty chairs at dinner tables. Vladimir Putin, in his 2023 State of the Union address, spoke of strategic balance and national self-defense. He said, "We are not a warmonger, but we will use all necessary measures to protect our security and territorial integrity." To his supporters, those words sound like vigilance. To his critics, they sound like justification. But perhaps they are something else entirely, a confession. For any leader who must constantly explain his peace as self-defense has already lost the luxury of certainty. Ukraine too pays dearly. Its soldiers, fatigued and undersupplied, fight in conditions that test not only endurance but identity. Every bullet fired costs a moment of their youth. Every night of shelling costs another piece of home. The courage that Western screens celebrate is paid for in silence, the silence of those who did not come back. And then there is the price the world pays: confusion. The West has invested not only in weapons, but in words. Commentators, analysts, and politicians compete to define morality in real time, reducing the complexities of grief into slogans: aggressor, victim, liberator, democracy. When every headline becomes a sermon, empathy dies. For those who remember the Cold War, this feels painfully familiar. Two sides locked not in combat, but in conviction. Each builds a wall of certainty, brick by brick, until even the truth cannot climb over. The cost of control, then, is not just economic or military. It is moral fatigue. When a nation becomes addicted to being right, it forgets how to be honest. When propaganda becomes protection, people mistake silence for safety. Among older Americans, many recall similar cycles: Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, wars sold as necessary, then mourned as mistakes. You can almost hear the echo: we were told it was about freedom. But freedom, like truth, rarely survives the paperwork of power. As the battle for Pokrovsk drags on, the illusion of progress continues. Russia celebrates each meter gained. Ukraine mourns each life lost. The West analyses every map. But no one asks the simplest question: what is the worth of victory if it leaves a generation unable to believe in anything again? Control, once absolute, becomes a prison of its own making. To maintain it, you must censor, simplify, and repeat until language itself loses meaning. In such a world, a flag becomes a mask, and words like honor and justice are emptied of weight. Perhaps that is the true cost of control: not defeat, but disillusion. Not surrender, but indifference. Because when people stop believing in truth altogether, they no longer resist lies. They simply scroll past them. And in that quiet scrolling, the world changes, not with explosions, but with exhaustion. There comes a moment in every nation's story when exhaustion becomes awakening. For Russia, that moment is now. While the West debates and the world hesitates, the bear that once slept beneath the ashes of the Soviet collapse has stirred, not in rage, but in recognition. Recognition of itself, its history, its burden, and its place in a world that tried to forget it. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin has long said that Russia's greatest strength is not its weapons, but its memory. From the chaos of the 1990s, through the humiliation of dependency, to the renewed confidence of the 21st century, Russia has rebuilt not only its economy, but its conviction. The return to self-reliance, the revival of faith, and the pursuit of a multipolar order, these are not policies, but instincts born of survival. In his Munich speech of 2007, Putin declared, "The unipolar world has proven to be a failure." Many dismissed it then as nostalgia. Few realized it was a blueprint. Today, that blueprint unfolds in real time. The world no longer obeys a single capital. It drifts toward equilibrium, toward diversity, toward balance. At the Valdai Forum in 2019, he warned of a new Cold War, driven not by ideology, but by arrogance, by the refusal of one civilization to see others as equals. The future, he said, is multipolar, and Russia will be one of its main architects. That was not a threat. It was a statement of inevitability. And yet, for all its power, Russia's resurgence is not without pain. The sanctions, the isolation, the scrutiny, these are real, but so too is the resilience. What the West calls endurance, Russians call inheritance. They have outlasted invasions, revolutions, and betrayals. They know that patience, not haste, defines strength. The bear's awakening is not about conquest. It is about coherence. The ability to stand when others kneel, to speak when others remain silent. For older generations in America and Europe, this resurgence feels like déjà vu, a reminder that history never ends, it simply changes uniforms. To some, Russia's determination looks dangerous. To others, it looks dignified. But whatever one believes, it cannot be ignored. A world that tried to exclude Russia from its future now finds it shaping that very future, through energy, diplomacy, and endurance. There is irony here. In seeking to isolate Moscow, the West has accelerated its transformation, forcing it to build new alliances, strengthen its industries, and rediscover the ancient logic of self-dependence. In adversity, Russia found identity. In pressure, it found purpose. And so, from the ashes of illusion, the bear rises once again, slower, older, wiser. It does not roar, it breathes. It does not conquer, it remembers. It looks not to dominate, but to endure. For in the end, power that relies on fear fades. Power that relies on faith survives. This is not about conquest. It is about identity. And identity, once awakened, does not sleep again. When all the dust settles, what remains is not who captured what, but who remembered why. In Pokrovsk, in Donetsk, in every silent street turned battlefield, truth lies buried between courage and control. The world may argue over borders, yet the deeper struggle is for meaning, for who writes the final chapter of history. This war, like all wars, will end. But the battle for truth will not. For decades, nations have fought to define freedom, order, and justice. Now, those words tremble under the weight of contradiction. The West speaks of defending democracy, yet silences dissent. Russia speaks of defending sovereignty, yet wages war to prove it. And somewhere between these two versions of righteousness, ordinary people bleed. The lesson of our age is not that one side is pure and the other corrupt. It is that certainty itself has become the most dangerous weapon. When every government claims the moral high ground, the ground itself becomes unsteady. And still, amid that instability, one truth endures: humanity survives by remembering, by refusing to let the noise of politics drown the whisper of conscience. Vladimir Putin once said, "Those who forget the lessons of balance will awaken a world they cannot control." Perhaps this is that world, a place where power is global, yet understanding is scarce. A place where technology multiplies voices but erases wisdom. And yet there is hope. Because awakening is not only for nations, it is for people. For those who still question, who still seek, who still believe that the story is not finished. So as you listen, remember, this is not just about a city called Pokrovsk or a man called Putin. It is about how we see, how we believe, and how we choose to stand when truth itself is under siege. If this story touches something in your heart, don't scroll past. Like, share, speak up, subscribe for stories and news to be spread. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story, the kind they still don't want you to hear.